Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from Indianapolis Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
I like that, like ripping off the glasses. Like that's such a power move.
They put the type on this roster so small that I have a hard time reading it, and even with the glasses sometimes. So
Sam and I are both now, me within the past year, members of the reading glasses fraternity. I was the longest holdout, I think, but I have joined that group since. Do you have the power move on the rosters, by the way, where you fold it over so that all the numbers are
I do it
on the same side?
Yes.
Then you fold it in half. Oh, it's perfect. Yeah, so we've just today wrapped up day 2 of preseason practice for Purdue football. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Sam is going to be around for some basketball on Saturday with the alumni game of sorts. And then I think we're probably going to get some interviews with the basketball team on Sunday as well. Purdue football holding its fan day before the scrimmage. So show up 8:15 a.m. Saturday morning. It's free admittance, free parking. And go watch a team practice in Ross-Ade Stadium. Get yourself some autographs if you're into that sort of thing. I won't be around for the next week, though. I will be on vacation, so make sure you're following Sam and jconline.com and adstar.com for all of your Purdue coverage. But, we got 2 very different looks, I thought, at preseason camp in some ways, yesterday being inside Mollenkopf and some of the things that they were doing, and today being outside at the Bible complex and working on some different things. Just, I guess, what's been your overall impression of the first 2 days?
Well, I mean, it's still kind of hard to tell, right? There were things that I was impressed with in the spring, and then some of the things that I've been impressed with the last couple of days were different. And I'll start with one area where I think Purdue significantly upgraded, and that's in the secondary. There's, a bunch of 6th-year guys. There's a bunch of guys who have played 20 to 30 college football games, and some of those guys aren't going to be starters. And to have those guys on your depth chart as backups or guys you can cycle in and out, I think is huge. That's an area where anybody who watched any Purdue football last year knows Purdue was obliterated in passing game, big plays. It's hard to beat teams when you're giving up 20 and 30-yard plays multiple times a game, and that was a major catalyst for why Purdue was, quite frankly, awful defensively last year. So I think that the coaching staff did a great job there, bringing in a bunch of guys who were experienced and, kind of giving them a chance to go out and compete and earn their playing time. It's brought out a lot of competitiveness, and I think in that group, and we've seen several different guys make plays in the secondary in just the first 2 days.
There were signs in the spring that this was going to be a strength of the defense. And right now, I still think of these things as relative to the rest of the roster, that the secondary looks both experienced and talented, and in a more concrete way. It might emerge in other positions as we go along. But that was the one that, even dating back to the spring, and then they made some additions since the end of the spring that I think further fortified that. But that thing you're talking about did kind of dawn on me between Big Ten Media Days and some of the conversations we had with Barry Odom there, and then just watching the first practice on Thursday and some of the plays that were being made. It did kind of hit me that this secondary really does have, I think, a higher proportion. I should have gone through the roster and done the math, but it just feels like a higher proportion of guys who this is it. Like, they've got one more shot. They're playing their 6th year or their 5th year, and they're just out of additional eligibility. Well, as far as we know, who knows what the NCAA will decide to do or decide not to do, and just get out of the way and let people do what they want. But as far as we know, this is the last year for a lot of important guys in that secondary. And that, I think, might help instill a sense of urgency in that group. And it doesn't mean that there aren't some talented younger guys too. But I thought you made a good point. Today we were talking to Stu Smith after practice. He's in his 3rd or 4th year of college football.
3rd year of college football, 3 different head coaches.
Yeah, but yeah, that too. But the fact that he's a 3rd-year guy, but he doesn't feel like an old guy in that room, because they have so many guys, whether it's Tony Grimes, whether it's Crew Wakely. I mean, just multiple guys. Taj Rael is a senior. There's a lot of guys in that who have been around for a lot of college football. But I think more to the point, the stake that they have in this season is I guess I shouldn't say greater. They're all committed, right? But like the urgency that this season creates for them is different because this is their last year of college football. For some of them, it will be their last year of organized football. Maybe all of them, for all we know. Tony Grimes is probably an NFL player. We'll see about the rest. But like for most of them, this might be it.
Yeah, and another guy you didn't mention there, Richard Toney. I think he's in his last year. He's done some good things that I've been impressed with. Hershey McLaurin had a phenomenal interception indoors on Thursday. So you're right. There's a sense of urgency there. And one of the things that Barry Odom said at Media Days last week in Las Vegas was he thinks Tony Grimes is a pro cornerback. And this is your chance to go out and prove it because, you got to put up a good season and then impress at either pro day or the combine and do enough to convince NFL scouts and coaches to take a chance on you and bring you to camp or draft you and give you a contract. But there's a lot of guys in that boat. Some of these guys are going to go on to the real world after this. Some of these guys are going to want to play, whether that's in the NFL or, in Europe or wherever you end up going, Canada, trying to continue their career, however they may do it. But I think the best thing about this is, and on the other side of the ball, but Armand Branch said this regarding the receivers. The coaches came in and said, hey, none of you have a job. You're all going out and trying to earn a job right now. It's not like, we may have paid you money to come here and this and that, but right now the depth chart is blank.
Let's put a pin in Armand Branch. We're definitely going to come back to him because he's an important part of what's happened just in the past week and things that we've seen. And I want to talk about kind of that dynamic. But since you just said the magic words depth chart, I thought we should just run down what we've seen in the 2 deep from the first 2 days. And a lot of it is the same as the spring, but some of it has changed. And just kind of want to get your take on if there have been any depth chart surprises. So let's start on defense. At the ends right now, it's Trey Smith and CJ Madden with the 1s. It's CJ Nunnally and Breon Ishmael with the 2s. At least that's what I've seen the most. Now, it is harder sometimes to gauge first, second, especially when it comes to quarterback reps that we'll talk about later, because they've got sometimes 3-4 different units rolling at once. So we try to track it as well as we can, but you can usually tell who's the 1s and who's the 2s. And then at defensive tackle, TJ Lindsey and Jamarian Harkless, and then inside on the 2s, D'Amico Kennedy and Jamarius Dinkins. And anything out of that group that catches your eye so far?
I said this to you today at practice. Like, man, Trey Smith kind of came out of nowhere. He was a 1 at defensive ends in the spring. He's maintained that spot at least through 2 days of camp. He's working with that first group, and he's a guy who was at Illinois 2 years ago, transferred to Purdue, didn't play much last year, and now he's kind of solidified himself as somebody who's going to be, whether he starts or not, going to be a major player for this defense at a marquee position. So I think he's a guy that maybe going into last spring, I wouldn't have noted down as somebody to watch, but now he's clearly making a name for himself enough to stand out to the coaches. CJ Madden, I think we all expect to be phenomenal. I think what he was called yesterday by strength coach Kiro Small is a genetic freak, something along those lines. He and TJ Lindsey, they looked the part. They looked the part on the field. They looked the part off the field. No surprises there. Breon Ishmael is the one that I was kind of intrigued by because he's been at Michigan. I think he was on the national championship team 2 years ago. So I thought, okay, here's a guy with a winning pedigree, much like a lot of the guys that came from Georgia, know what it takes to win. I want to see what they can do now if they're given a bigger role and a chance to go out there and succeed and get a lot of playing time.
And one of the things that struck me watching spring practice sometimes was this team just feels small. It just doesn't feel that big. And the defensive line and what they've done there, and some of these guys have changed their bodies a little bit since they got here. But some of this is just they have found big bodies and are making them work for them. CJ Madden is 275. I think TJ Lindsey is 310. Jamarian Harkless is 345. You start to put like some real stout guys up front. I just wrote a piece for Indy Star. I don't remember when it ran, last week maybe, about, or maybe it was earlier this week, about kind of in a series of things I've been writing about the recruiting and especially kind of this foundation setting 2026 class. And Brad Odom and Jason Simmons, talking to those guys on the staff about kind of recruiting in general and why maybe this 2026 class had such a slant towards linemen. And part of it is, I think, just how they want to play. But there's another part of it that is, and it's ironic because they've brought in all these guys through the portal, obviously. But how are you going to control your bankroll the best, or control your payroll the best, is by developing the positions that would cost you the most to go get. And defensive line is really high on that list. And Brad Odom was talking about how when they were at Nevada, or at UNLV, but recruiting out of the state of Nevada, that they found it really hard to find big guys who move fast. Like that kind of athlete was more scarce out there for whatever reason than they feel like it is here in the Midwest. I feel like there's a better base of recruiting for that. And I'm getting a little bit away because that's future and this is who is here now. But it doesn't surprise me that they have maybe just identified the largest human beings and are doing what they can to get those guys in position to really excel. But that combination of size and speed that you get from someone like CJ Madden or from CJ Nunley, some of these other guys, that's obviously intriguing just because this pass rush has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, I thought CJ Nunley would be, just based on what he did in the MAC, a guy that you could plug in starting role right away. And he may be. But the nice thing is Purdue has options, which was something last year. There were a handful of guys where we were like, beyond that guy, there's nothing. And that's where Purdue probably upgraded the most, is just building depth behind the guys that were the key guys, and bringing in proven players at the college level that you think can contribute. And now you're asking a guy who was an all-MAC defensive end to play, limited snaps, or, be able to alternate in and out. So he'll be a marquee piece of this, whether he's a starter or not. And I think there's going to be a lot of guys. We talked about the secondary and how loaded it is with just names of guys that are trying to prove themselves one last time before getting their hopeful shot at the next level. The one position on the defense where I don't know if that's the case is linebacker. That's the one where I probably have a little bit of questions. Manny Powell is the guy that clearly is the leader of the defense, and he's a centerpiece of that. But give me your take on the linebackers, because that's, there's 3 or 4 guys there that I think are going to play, but that's a position where I'm still a little unsure.
So this is one where there was a slight depth chart surprise for me, at least for the start of camp. So Manny Powell, we knew, he's going to be a starting linebacker. He'll probably be, I don't know if they're going to officially name captains this year, but he essentially is working as a captain would, I think, right now. That's just kind of the air that he's brought in. And then Charles Correa, who just came in through the portal at the end of camp, has been working with the ones next to him. Now, they obviously were the starting linebackers or played linebacker together. I shouldn't say they both started, but played linebacker together at UNLV. They know this defense. They know Barry Odom and Mike Scherer, and they already have a connection and a rapport and a communication. So it would make some sense that would eventually emerge. And just because preseason camp started, they've been doing their own player-led practices and other workouts and things for the past few months. So it's not like they all just showed up Thursday morning and got thrown out there. This is based on what we are seeing is based on things that they've been seeing behind the scenes. So that one just caught me a little bit surprise. And then that means that Sanders Ellis, and Alex Sanford, who was with the ones I think a lot in the spring, have been the twos. And this is actually a position group that I am cautiously optimistic about right now, only because I do think that there is some upside to potentially everybody that I just named. I don't think they're going to have to do something like they did last season, where they're taking guys, that maybe don't fit there the best and having to move them to linebacker, and then losing something somewhere else. And I think they have enough depth at linebacker that they can get better production out of that group. But that was the group that had, and it was none of these guys, obviously, but just in a vacuum, that was the position group, except maybe quarterback, that I thought had the farthest to go. That linebacker was such a liability last season. It was at the heart of why that defense was so bad, frankly, and they had to turn that over completely and get it going in another direction. And it makes sense, maybe especially with that as the backdrop, if Mike Scherer and Barry Odom turn to the guys that they know the best to sort of lead that effort.
Yeah, and Manny Powell talked about this when he got here in the spring. It was kind of seamless because he already understands the lingo, the language of what this defense is trying to teach, and now he's relaying that to a bunch of guys. Not a bunch. I guess there are a bunch of guys who don't know and catching them up to speed. And now it's should be second nature for him, for Charles Correa, but also some of the other guys clearly have picked up on it over the course of the spring. Working together, and then now through the summer and into what I guess is 30 days of camp leading up to the season opener.
No big shocks at corner from my standpoint necessarily. Tony Grimes and Ryan Turner working with the ones. Those are both guys. I mean, that was what it was in the spring for most part. And those guys, Grimes is another guy who came in right away and took a huge leadership role. That's why he was in Las Vegas for Big Ten Media Days. And then Hidori Hines and Travion Wright as the twos for the most part at the outside corner spots. That's a position that I think, again, had to get better. There's reason to believe that it has, just because with those first two guys, and Grimes and Turner, you're bringing in guys who weren't just at other places. Like, they actually have some experience playing at other places, especially in the case of Grimes. And we're both at one point really highly ranked prospects. And for whatever reason, that didn't always break through. Grimes was an honorable mention all ACC guy one year when he was at North Carolina. I don't think Turner ever really had that sort of breakthrough there. He started his career at Ohio State. So it's before he went to Boston College. So two guys who know what they're doing out on the field. And now I think it's just a matter of the fact that if they can get someone like Hines, who has had some moments and shown some promise, you start to bring up that like third and fourth corner. I think that's going to be pretty critical, because that was another position where I thought they were exposed last year at times. They were exposed when their starting team was on the field last year too, sometimes, but certainly when you had to go to any sort of depth at most positions on the defense.
Yeah, and Hines is a homegrown guy, so like that is because of the situation. There are a ton of new guys, a bunch of portal additions, and that's college football in general on this roster. But you also, and Barry Odom said this, what they want to do is get guys in their pipelines, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, basically the states that border Indiana and then your home state, and develop them. And here you have a guy who's from Indianapolis. He's been in the program, decides to stay, even though he didn't get a ton of playing time last year. And now he's in line to play quite a bit. So he's kind of, right now, I guess, I think he's a sophomore, young guy. He's kind of the face of what they want to ultimately be, which is getting these guys, developing them, and then kind of back to what you were talking about. That's great for the payroll aspect of it, because you would rather pay your own guys that you are developing and seeing, and instead of, throwing a chunk of money and just going and getting guys and trying to slap a team together. So I think it's huge for the program moving forward. If he's able to step in, play, have some success, and show that, this thing is working kind of to the way that they anticipate the long-term effects of building a program will.
And I think, Hines being a 2 right now is more probably fitting with his career path than him having to play a lot as a freshman, a true freshman, right? Like that's another, I think, sign sometimes of the health of a roster is, are you doing something because you have to, or are you doing something because that guy is absolutely ready to be a Big Ten player? And I think this season, I was talking to somebody yesterday. We're only halfway through this, or not even, but just that I don't feel like this roster is as talented at the top. I just don't. I mean, I don't look around and see Max Clare and Dylan Thieneman and Will Helt even. And like, I don't know that they may have some pass rush talent. I just don't know if I see like the top of the roster being as talented as it was last year. But I do think there is very potentially more quality depth. And I think someone like Hines kind of coming into his own at corner could be a part of that. Leading off of that into something we already talked about, the safety two deep so far, Miles Slusher and Taj Rael with the ones, Richard Toney and Crew Wakely with the twos. Those are the deep safeties, and then Stu Smith at nickel with Andarius Coffey behind him. Andarius Coffey, the one uniform switch of the spring. He's wearing number 24 as he was, I think, 14 before that. So, but as we already kind of indicated, that was a better group. If anything, I was maybe surprised to see Miles Slusher with the ones so much on day one, a guy who just transferred in the spring. But again, these guys aren't transferring in from the MAC or from any group of five. They're transferring in from the SEC. Trayvon Wright, who I mentioned before, that's I think a Mississippi State guy, right? Like they've got guys from major conferences that are just kind of oozing out of the walls right now. And Barry Odom was pretty upfront, I thought, on Thursday when we talked to him, that there, as it relates to the whole secondary, there's still guys that they're not sure yet. Is that guy a corner for us? Is he a safety? If we decide which way he goes, or is he more of a nickel? Because that can be kind of a hybrid of those things, right? Like there's if he's a corner, is he a field corner? Is he a boundary corner? Like there's still some identification that they're in the process of doing, because some of these guys, they haven't watched them with their own eyes right in front of them play real football. And that's probably something that doesn't sound like the timeline you want to be on, and it's not, but I don't think it's uncommon to them. I think there's a lot of teams, especially in their tier, their competitive tier of football right now, that are in that same position because their roster turned over just as much.
Yeah, something Barry Odom said Thursday after the first practice of fall camp was, you're going to get sick of hearing me say the words cross-training. But he referred back to the COVID season when he, I believe, was the defensive coordinator at Arkansas, and you never knew week to week what guys, how many guys you were going to have out there. So you were training guys at every position you thought that they were capable of playing. And then he's just kind of kept that approach. Like, the more versatile you can be, the more valuable you are to your team. So he is working guys at safety and corner in different spots, nickel corner, coverage corner on the outside. He's working defensive ends in the inside. I'm sure the linebackers are working both sides, switching back and forth. And you want to know as much of the position playbook as you can, I guess. And, the benefits of that, if you have an injury, it's, probably not as drastic a fall off, because you have guys that are capable of going in and are switching positions and, already being caught up to speed on what their role is.
Let's transition over to offense. There's somebody we already mentioned. I just noticed, by the way, that the crawl at the bottom of the screen is for the Indy Stars Fever podcast. Just ignore that. If you see that, it was showing up on my screen. I don't know if it's showing up anybody else. So there it is. Chloe and Brian are not on this podcast. This is just us today. But follow our Fever coverage at IndyStar.com. Let's talk about, we have an interesting job, I think, sometimes, in that sometimes asking a really specific question is what gets you the answer you need, and more importantly, our readers the answer they need. And sometimes asking a really vague question gets you the answer you need. And going back to Big Ten Media Days, I had just been kind of throwing out, I was talking to Tony Grimes, and I was like, who among the receivers has impressed you so far? And I asked, in various capacities the last 2 days, we've been asking either a defensive back or a defensive player who has impressed you among the receivers, or we've asked Barry Odom, or we asked Kiro Small, like who's been impressive. And I think in like every instance, the first name out of their mouths has been Armand Branch. Like that guy's name keeps coming up, and it's not because people are asking about Armand Branch. And I don't think there's any more positive thing you can say about any player than when you're not prompting them to talk about them, but that's the person that universally keeps coming up. He's been impressive. And I will say, I think the first couple days of camp, he sort of lived up to that. When that starts to build, I sometimes think, oh, well, okay, sure, you did some things in the summer. We'll see how it looks when you're when the pads go on or whatever. But I think he's had a really good first couple of days of camp, and he really does look like someone who, in the midst of all this whirlwind of transfers and the turnover and everything, that's somebody who stayed, and somebody who I think could be putting himself in position to take on a bigger role.
Yeah, and interesting nugget. I think we learned it in the spring, talking to him once, but he reemphasized it today. He's a guy who never played football until he was a junior in high school. And he's not a very big dude, but he is fast. He used to be a triple jumper, stand out at Festus High School in Missouri, and basketball standout. There are some videos I went back and looked in the spring of him. He's not a very tall guy, but he's got springs in his legs. And now he's got the speed. He's kind of a downfield threat. He made a great catch in traffic downfield today. He's the guy that, you're right. When everybody is saying the same guy is standing out, he's doing something to pop on the tape and practices to catch the eyes of several different players. It's not like these guys all huddle around and be like, hey, who are we going to prop up today when the media asks, what guys we're impressed with. It's definitely a thing where this is a guy who's impressed. And honestly, Thursday, I wasn't paying that much of attention to him because I was looking at some of the new guys who had come in, Nitro Tuggle, guys like that. And then because his name was brought up yesterday by multiple people, I specifically watched him in drills and watched him during the scrimmage sessions today and was like, you know what, this is a guy that, could maybe be an under the radar guy that pops off for Purdue if the offense is successful this year in the passing game. He did have a touchdown at Illinois last year. I think everybody had a touchdown at Illinois last year, but it was a play that he said he'd been waiting to be called all season long. And then that day they ran it, and it sounds like it was supposed to be a pass play type thing. And he just was like, hey, I've got the corner. He ran it in for a 2-yard touchdown, I think is what happened. So, but that was up until now, really the only time we mentioned Armad Branch. And then in the spring, he starts to stand out a little bit. And then now clearly is a guy that may take off.
Yeah, and I asked him because this dynamic has been interesting to me. The idea that this team, the coaching transition happens. There's already some guys, believe it or not, who did stay. Like not everybody transferred out. There were guys who started their career at Purdue and are still at Purdue going into the spring. And then in the spring, you had this huge batch of transfers that came in. Now, Barry Odom was up front and said they were going to really hit the spring transfer portal hard as well. I think he knew that there would be a good chunk of outgoing guys too that they would have to fill those spots. But you still have, you come out and you put out your best foot and get to make the first impression on your coaches in the spring and think maybe you've earned something on the in the hierarchy and everything. And then in the end of the spring, they bring in Nitro Tuggle and Michael Jackson III and
Corey Smith.
They're bringing in other power conference wide receivers, some of them very highly ranked. And you can respond to that in one of two ways. I think you can respond to that in the way that isn't a highly competitive way and kind of sulk about it and probably end up losing your spot. Or you can do what Armad Branch has done, which is, hey, bring it on. I still haven't earned anything. I've still got to go out and have a great summer and fall if I want to play a big role on the team this season. And that's what he's done. I mean, I specifically asked him about that, and you can see the recognition in his face. Like, yeah, that happened. Like, they brought in a bunch of good dudes, but here I am. You're still talking about me. He didn't say that, but that's the subtext, right? He responded.
Yeah. And it's not like these are guys that I did ask for Armad Branch today because of the responses we got yesterday. And I thought that would be an interesting guy to talk to, being a guy who came back and was here under the previous regime. But he's definitely a guy that's I think because he's been there before and didn't have a huge role, and now he can help bring along some of these guys, because we mentioned Corey Smith and Nitro Tuggle. Those guys are sophomores. I think Corey was at Tulsa, Nitro Tuggle was at Georgia, and they played a little bit as freshmen. Corey Smith had pretty decent numbers at Tulsa, but they're Indiana guys who, for whatever reason, they wanted to go in the portal and try to find somewhere else, and they came back closer to home. If you start talking, I know we're talking about this season, talking down the line, you've got Armad Branch, Nitro Tuggle, Corey Smith for 2 and 3 years. I know that's asking a lot in today's college football world.
I talk about
that's what I was talking about with Barry Hines. You're building a nice little base there of guys you can develop and have success, ideally, for years down the road.
Yeah, I know. I think potentially. Let's talk about the receiver depth chart. And nothing about this really shocked me, although I will say I think I forgot to write down the twos today. But the ones today, as far as what I had, was Branch and TJ Lindsey and Denial Morissette, although they have rotated a lot there.
Mhm.
I think Charles Ross might have been in there at one point. Like
Chauncey
that's been the
Magwood
position.
played with the ones a little bit.
Who was that?
Chauncey Magwood.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the position where there's just been the most fluid rotation. And that hasn't really included Nitro Tuggle with the ones yet, but they may get there at some point. Michael Jackson the third has made some nice plays. Like this was another area where they had to raise the floor. Last year at receiver, it just, as much as you want to fault the quarterback play or the performance of the first offensive Graham Harrell or the performance of the second offensive coordinator who never should have been calling plays or on down the line, I do think there was something to be said for just a kind of a lack of spark coming from that receiver group, a lack of separation. Some of it might have been, though, that there were some people who it wasn't their time yet. They weren't ready for that. They were being pushed beyond what they could do. Some of those guys are still around, and this might just be the more natural timeline. Plus, what Barry Odom's staff has done with them over the past 8 months might just be the more normal timeline for them to step forward and have a bigger role.
Yeah. The main thing is, again, a lot of guys, a lot of competition there. It's not a thing where I think anybody in this receiver group goes out and has 50 or 60 catches this season, but you might get a bunch of guys that are, valuable 30 catch guys, for example, and sometimes that's better. But aside from Armand Branch's name keep coming up, people are talking about everybody. EJ Horton, guy we haven't mentioned yet, in the receiver room. There just seems to be options again, which is the key word. Last year, I don't think, especially at receiver, there were a whole lot of guys you could trust to go out there and make plays. So the more guys that you have that can do that, better.
I mean, listen, we all fall into these traps sometimes in preseason camp. Last year, it was, there's a true freshman who's blowing up in preseason camp, or there's, hey, they brought in this guy from Georgia and look how fast he is. And then he gets hurt and things just never got on track. Like it just never happened last year for that offense, really from top to bottom, except maybe you could, obviously for Max Clare, now gone, and Devin Mockbee had an all right season. So the passing game had to get better. I still think from these last 2 days, did you think yesterday had involved more passing and today involved more running? That's just how it felt to me. Like it felt like there was more ground game work today. They did do some 11-on-11 stuff, 2-minute drill, end of game against the defense sort of things. But I thought yesterday was a day where the secondary showed a real advantage most of the time over the offense. Although I will say the most impressive catch I think I've seen in 2 days was Armand Branch had like this reach behind one-handed catch and then went in for a score in one of the drills that they were doing. So there is some talent out there. It's just a matter of finding it consistently.
Yeah, and there was a heavy focus on special teams today as well, which, seems like that's going to be something where Barry Odom is going to emphasize the importance of that, which, sometimes that's a area that gets ignored when you think about offense and defense. But aside from that, yes. And then when there was some scrimmaging today where it was, ones-on-ones or whatever, I felt like the defense did a good job of forcing the offense to check down or take the safe play, a screen pass or whatever it might be. And that's what you want. You want to keep the ball in front of you. So I would definitely say over the last 2 days, the defense has beat the offense if we're keeping score, trying to say, who has the upper hand right now. But that's not to say that the defense is great or that the offense isn't good enough to move the ball or whatever. But it's just, the vision that I've seen out of those 2 days.
Today it was closer. I think what I'm still waiting to see, like the offense hasn't gone out in any of these competitive drills yet and just kind of imposed its will. And I think you're going to have to do that at some point, even against your own team, to show that you can go out and do it in a game. And I think there's been more moments like what you're talking about. We're seeing a couple plays where the pocket gets blown up, but that isn't happening that often. I think a lot of times it is this secondary creating some sacks. You're getting a lot of timing sacks, like the whistle blows after a certain time in these competitive drills because the quarterback still has a ball in his hands 5 seconds after it was snapped or whatever. And they're not, it's non-contact obviously for those guys. So they're blowing it dead, maybe a little early, but still, I'm still seeing that. And that's a thing that has carried through from the spring where maybe the edge the secondary has over the receivers is something that either the quarterbacks are having trouble adjusting to and figuring a way out of. There have been a couple of times they pulled the ball down and run with it and done the right thing there. Or is it a matter of there's more the quarterbacks need to do to overcome that? Because you're going to face opponents that can do that to you too.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because at Big Ten Media Days, I was talking to Tony Grimes about CJ Madden, and he said, if CJ has a big year, I'll have a big year. Meaning, if he gets to the quarterback and disrupts things, you're going to force bad passes. That's going to make life easier on me. So I go to CJ Madden and say, hey, Tony Grimes just said this. And he goes, well, if he has a good year, I'm going to have a good year. Meaning if he does his job and knocks down receivers, that's more time for me to chase around quarterbacks. And that goes for the whole defensive line, linebackers or whoever. But that's kind of the whole point of football. Like, it's an 11-man game and you require everybody to do their job for success. But it's also kind of telling where a lot of times defensive linemen aren't talking about cornerbacks and saying like, their mindset is I've got to get to the quarterback. But the longer you can hold receivers or keep them from being open, the better chances of that happening are. And, Kadrian Jenkins was a great pass rusher before that. Nick Scorton was a good pass rusher. Will Hutt was a good pass rusher. But if you can't get to the quarterback because guys are wide open within the time frame it takes to do a 3-step or 5-step drop or whatever, it doesn't matter how good your pass rush is. So back to the defense, I guess, briefly, that it seems like this is a thing where everybody understands that as a unit, they can be pretty effective if they're all relying on each other. Now, back to the point of the offense, yes, you're right. I think that they want to establish themselves as a run team. I've called it more 50-50 probably, but they want to be a team that can run the football and beat you by running the football. It's pretty telling that Barry Odom is aware of how close Devin Mockabee is to Purdue's all-time rushing record. Whether he gets there or not, it's 1,200 or so yards, 1,269, I think maybe, from catching Mike Allstott. But the coach knowing that and realizing it's possible tells me that there's an emphasis on running the ball. And then Barry Odom mentioned yesterday, Malachi Thomas, who's a guy who transferred from Virginia Tech. We didn't see in the spring because he was hurt. He's the guy that I thought looked pretty good today as well.
Yeah, and I thought, obviously, Mockabee with the ones, and as you would expect. And Antonio Harris was running a lot with the twos, and I thought he had some really good moments today. I thought he showed some really nice bursts. He got out to the edge against the number one defensive front on a just like a 7-on-7 kind of drill or a goal line drill where they didn't really have a secondary. And, things like that, like having just some plus speed that you can mix in there behind Devin Mockabee is potentially a huge thing. And I agree with you. I think that it's going to be a ground-oriented offense. However, I would say more than like the play calling balance, I think that's kind of irrelevant. I think, do opponents have an equal positive respect for both sides of the ball? That's the step that they need to take. And it's sometimes harder to achieve. You can call an even number of plays intentionally, but do you have a running game and a passing game both that make a defense they keep a defense honest and make a defense have to factor for both of those things as they're game planning for you? I don't think they're there yet. I think they've still got to take some steps with the passing game, but I think they're headed in that direction. We'll get to quarterback in a second. Let's do offensive line real quick, and we'll close on quarterbacks. But offensive line, I asked Barry Odom about this after Thursday. I'm like, hey, that's pretty much the same group of five, first team that you've been using since spring. He's like, oh, that'll change tomorrow. Vance will, mix those up. It wasn't. It was the same guys.
Same guys.
It's Joe Tenona, Jalen St. John, Gio Vaccaro, Ethan Trent, and Baking Coley with the first team. And my second team, I think this is correct, that we've seen so far. I had Randall, Vicari, Joyner, Nave, and McCoskey. So, and there may have been some other guys mixing in there too. That is a position where, especially behind that first string, they're going to rotate some guys in.
Yeah, I had Hank Purvis at right guard also in that second group. So
yeah. But focusing on that first group, again, it's like the things that are said and the things that are unsaid. That is the guys that they've been playing there going back to the spring. Like, that unit has more or less been together. And there's a thing about offensive line continuity in football and how important it is for them to have some connectivity and that rapport and being used to playing together and all of those things. I thought our colleague Tom Dienhart from Golden Black just straight up asked Jalen St. John today, like, should people be surprised that Ethan Trent, who was a walk-on until the spring, is with the ones at right guard? And he said, no, he works really hard, and he does everything he's supposed to do. I guess just anytime someone has that walk-on stigma, there's always going to be the thing of that position seems the most vulnerable. I understand that. I probably even feel that way myself when I'm analyzing a team most of the time. I think more importantly right now is there is a depth of options there. I think that they can look into that second group and see guys who have played at a high level, or at least played at high level programs or been in high level programs, maybe haven't played that much yet, but guys who have had roles on winning teams, guys who could maybe be counted on. And that was another group that I thought over the last 2 years, definitely more so in Ryan Walters' first year than last year, but where the injuries just ravaged them past the point of really any expectation of having that kind of depth, right? But they're going to need 8. I think you got to have like 8 starting caliber offensive linemen to give yourself some options. And I think it's reasonable to think that they are building towards that.
Yeah, and you're right. 2 years ago they couldn't even practice because they didn't have 5 healthy linemen.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. And they didn't want to risk practicing and having a guy get hurt and then not having 5 on game day. But they made an emphasis. Purdue made an emphasis in the spring to have 20 offensive linemen, and I think started spring with 18. And Barry Odom's like, "Hey, if you want to be a part of this for a few weeks, come out here. We got a spot for you." Basically, just inviting anybody to be a member of the football team through spring, so they could have 4 groups of 5 is the idea. And that's something that yesterday I really noticed was you had 4 offensive units simultaneously working. And, that's ideal because everybody's getting the equal number of reps. You can move guys around if you need to. And then, like you said, you get Braden Joyner came from Auburn and played quite a bit there. Mark Nave came from Kentucky. He was in the SEC. And these are guys who right now are working with your 2s. You've developed, ideally some depth there and guys who have played at high level of college football already that you can hopefully depend on in case something happens. I do want to point out that Ethan Trent was a walk-on, but not under this team. Like that was one of the things that Barry Odom did was give him a scholarship and say like, hey, we see the potential in this guy. Devin Mockabee was a walk-on for Jeff Brown. And then Ryan Walters came in and said, this guy has earned a scholarship and gave him one, rightfully so. So like in this staff's eyes, Ethan Trent is a scholarship player in the Big Ten. So I think they saw something in him, and it wasn't just something where, hey, he's Tyler Trent's brother and he's a part of this program, let's give him a scholarship. It was like, this guy has gone out, busted his butt. He's the first spring practice. I think he was one of the guys that they brought in for us to interview. He's a guy who has earned the spot or in the scholarship and can probably help us win some football games. And now he's been for, throughout spring and now early in fall camp, been the starting unit.
I mean, listen, we are still a full month removed from the start of the season, so things can change during preseason camp. I just think it was notable that those are the same guys and that they have just kept rolling with those guys. When you look at, again, it's all in context. You look at other positions, and Miles Slusher walks in and he's back there on day 1, and Charles Correa walks in and he's back there on day 1. But some of these offensive linemen that just walked in aren't there on day 1. I just thought that was notable. Now it's different. Position coaches are making those calls. It's not Barry Odom telling people where to go. Typically it's Vance Weiss is making that call with his unit, as is the other coaches with their units. But I don't know, that just kind of meant something to me. Although Mark Nave is pretty huge. Like those guys that came in look like they can play football. So we'll see how that develops over the course of the spring. We haven't mentioned tight end, over the preseason camp. We haven't mentioned tight end. It's been Christian Earls mostly with the ones. George Burhan looks like he is still limited to some extent. I mean, he's out there and he's in pads, but I also see him kind of hanging out of some stuff too. So I think that's just still a matter of getting him back to full strength. But another position where you need like 2 or 3 guys, and they're working their way towards that. So let's talk about quarterback. So yesterday, I should say Thursday, because I don't know when people are listening to this. Thursday, first day of camp, it was mostly Ryan Brown and Malachi Singleton working with the 1s and 2s. And today, it was largely Bennett Meredith and Evans Chuba working with the 1 and 2. So there actually is a fifth scholarship quarterback in
Garrett Odom.
Garrett Odom. I started to say Grant. Garrett Odom. So that's one reason why they want to have 20 offensive linemen, because you got to get all of your scholarship quarterbacks a bunch of reps. But nothing to be, I don't think, I don't have a huge lean out of these first 2 days, other than to say, if I were to put someone fourth right now, it would be Evans Chuba, only because I don't think he is consistent enough yet in his career. That's not me writing him off as a football player or writing him off even as a starting quarterback for someday. I just think that if you're trying to handicap this for day one, I don't know that he has the best chance to win it, just because some of that stuff from the spring, and you still see him make some nice plays, some of that stuff from the spring with the turnovers is still there. He's coming along. Barry Odom even specifically mentioned that he thinks he's done better in ball security since the end of the spring. But I think those other three guys are ahead of him. So then it's just a matter of how things shake up between Ryan Brown, Malachi Singleton, and Bennett Meredith. And I think what you're seeing in all three cases are good things. It's just a matter of, are the good things being replicated enough, and are the mistakes not being replicated enough?
Yeah, and I said this today on the social media platform formerly known as X, in a short recap
MySpace?
of today. What? Or on Twitter.
Oh,
formerly known as Twitter, currently known as X. But I said, in the spring when they were saying Bennett Meredith was in a 4-man battle for the quarterback role, I was kind of like, and it was a different group of quarterbacks. Ryan Brown wasn't here. EJ Colson was. That's since changed. But I thought, okay, they're, kind of throwing him a bone and saying, hey, we're going to let you compete for the starting job. Today I said, no, he's fully entrenched in this QB battle, I think. He's elevated himself. And, throughout the spring, I thought, I can see Bennett Meredith maybe as the safe option. He doesn't take as many high-risk plays. He makes the smart play more often maybe than some of the others. But today he ripped one downfield, threaded the needle on a deep ball to Armand Branch that looked impressive. Ryan Brown clearly has great ability to make plays with his legs. So does Malachi Singleton. That's an added element to the offense if they're the guy. I really could see, you're right. I think Evans Chuba right now just probably makes more mistakes than the other guys, and is still learning. But he definitely has a big arm and a ton of talent, and he's a big dude. But these other three are probably going to battle it out. Don't know. My gut leans towards Ryan Brown probably in the long run, but there's a reason they're doing this battle. They want to make the educated decision to put the right guy that can give them the best chance to win down the line. So it's great to have that. It's great that they're getting a lot of guys a lot of reps, but right now it doesn't tell us a whole lot. We're just kind of going by what we see.
Yeah, Ryan Brown is the one of those three who we have seen have the most game success for Purdue, at least for one game, right? Like the Illinois game, the overtime loss, is probably the most success that any of these quarterbacks have had in a Purdue uniform. Bennett Meredith has played in a Purdue uniform. Obviously, Malachi Singleton has not. But I think right now, like, I was trying to watch the quarterbacks a lot today, and somewhat yesterday too, but a decent amount today. And I tried to watch it how I thought a coach might watch it, which is whatever the outcome of the play after it leaves their hand. Did it leave their hand at the right time? Did it leave their hand in the right way? Like, they're throwing these screen passes. Like, who's throwing more consistently, like throwing that ball where it's supposed to be so the guy can very easily catch it and head upfield with his blockers. Like, things like that. Like, how quickly is the ball getting out? They're all having their moments. I don't think anybody's doing that so consistently that it jumps out at you that person has separated. And some of these things we are watching, by the way, all of practice. Like, we watched all of the first two practices. By the schedule we've been given, we are going to watch almost all the practices. The exception will be the Saturday practices, not the one on this coming Saturday, the fan day. That one is open, but the next 3 Saturdays are not open to us. I would assume those are going to be heavily scrimmage situations where some of the real meat of this might come down to, right? Like that's where I think the separation is probably going to happen, is in those situations. And we'll try to get what intel we can on those, even though they're behind closed doors. But that's, I think, where this is going to have to happen. And it isn't, it's performance, obviously. But I thought Barry Odom said something interesting too on Thursday, which was this is his first chance to listen to Ryan Brown in a practice, let alone watch him in a practice. But this is his first time to hear how he works out on the field and how he talks to his teammates and how he communicates what has to be done and how he's just handling himself. Like all of those things factor into who they ultimately decide to take that first snap against Ball State.
Yeah. And I would not be surprised if multiple people play quarterback those first two games. This could be a competition that's not settled until maybe the entire season, but you would think you would at least be, have one labeled as your number one quarterback going into your Big Ten opener against USC. But if the games are, what typically happens when a Power 4 team plays a MAC school or an FCS school, I would expect Purdue to try to get these guys as many reps as possible with ones, with twos, with whoever, just to see how they manage a game-like situation, which is you can replicate in practice, but you can't totally simulate it until you're there and there's 60,000 people in the stands. And that's, probably going to be maybe the most telling is that game, first game against Ball State, how these guys respond.
I think that first game against Ball State, if this was a different scenario, things were a little bit more settled just for the program, I might assume that they were going to play whoever the top two quarterbacks are and almost alternate them or come up with something like that, right? I don't know if they'll go that route because they need to win that game so bad. Like you can't lose that game. Like you got to find a way to open with a win. And they'll be favored to win that game, but still, I don't know that anything is a gimme anymore. The Southern Illinois game is much more like a gimme, and I think it would be malpractice if you didn't see multiple quarterbacks handling the number one offense in a game like that, a game where you're trying to play everybody anyway, right? Like that's the game where they want everybody to play in that game by the end of the game, right? That should be a fourth quarter of third and fourth string guys. So, but when the game is still in doubt in the first half, I still think you've got to find a way to get multiple quarterbacks out there. There's not really a downside to it, and it gives you a better idea of what you've really got. Because sometimes I remember, covering quarterback competitions elsewhere, like, coaches would say, you don't really know. Like you can make your decision based on what you've seen in practice for months. And then, as you were just kind of alluding to, you get to game day and it's a different world. And how do they respond to that? It could be completely different than how they played all week. Like that's in every sport, right? Guys who are known as like practice players, but have trouble putting it on the field. So, and the adversity is different. The stakes are different when there's actually a scoreboard and this game counts. So I would, as I'm sitting here on the second day of camp, I look into a future and see multiple quarterbacks playing in those first two games at least. Try to get things settled. The schedule sets up where you have two winnable games where you can experiment still a little bit and probably still even fairly comfortably win those first two games. Cautiously saying that against Ball State. And then now you get serious. Now you got to play USC. Now you got to play Notre Dame. You still have to have the best team, though, to win games later in your schedule. I just think that there's too much upside to not play multiple guys in those first two games, and then have things more focused for that USC game behind probably just one guy.
Yeah, and that's probably a topic that will be ongoing for the next 28 days. Never can get enough of talking about the quarterbacks. That's kind of the mantra in covering college football, or probably pro football, and maybe not so much at the high school level. But whenever there's a quarterback competition, that's kind of what drives, in our world, what drives eyeballs to whatever we write or talk about. So that will be something that we'll keep an eye on every day that we're out there. And as of right now, like you said, they're going to give four guys a shot to go out there and win this thing. Just right now, I don't know that anybody's consistently proven, hey, I'm better than the rest of the options. You see positives from everybody, you see negatives from everybody, and you've now got to, at some point, Darren Henshaw and Josh Henson and Barry Odom have to sit down and be like, here's the pluses with this guy, here's the minuses with this guy, and they'll settle on, some sort of 1 through 4, and Garrett Odom, redshirting this year probably will be the option there, and he'll have 4 years of eligibility after this.
Yeah, not that I expected to show up at the start of camp and be like, oh my gosh, that guy turned into Lamar Jackson. That guy turned into Josh Allen. That guy turned into whoever over the summer. Like that. This is about what I expected it to look like, right? There's still some flashes. There's still some hiccups. They've got another month to figure that out, but more to the point, they're going to keep figuring it out beyond that. I just think that this is the situation they have. This is who they were able to bring in for this year. This isn't a quarterback you've been developing for 3 or 4 years, although actually in the case of Ryan Brown, it's more like that because he was here before. But there's a destination at the end of the road, and opening day isn't the only destination. It's got to carry you all through the season. They've got to find multiple quarterbacks to get through a season. I told Sam we were going to talk for like 20 minutes. It's been almost an hour, so we should probably wrap it up there. Although we didn't do a true like camp preview, so this kind of can be 2 in 1. It's like both the preview and the recap of the first couple days. Like I said, I'm going to be gone most of next week, but follow Sam's coverage at Samuel T. King on Friendster or whatever that is, and x.com. Come to IndyStar.com, come to JCOnline.com. We're going to have a lot of Purdue sports-related stuff over the next week. It just won't be written by me. And I will talk to you when I get back from my time off. For Sam King, I'm Nathan Baird. See you later.